Breaking news now, reporting on these 8 subjects is banned by the Israeli military censor. Among the 8 topics that the Israeli media are not allowed to cover, according to a document that The Intercept obtained, are the weapons used by the Israel Defense Forces, leaks from the Security Cabinet, and stories about individuals held hostage by Hamas. No one has heard of the document before. It is a censorship order that the Israeli military sent to the media during its war with Hamas. The censor of the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, who has served for over 70 years, made an unusual move by penning the document in English. Michael Omerman, who is currently the Director of Research for Israel-Palestine and Democracy in the Arab World Now, DAWN, a U.S. advocacy group, says, "I haven't ever seen instructions like this sent from the censor aside from general notices broadly telling outlets to comply, and even then it was only sent to certain people." Omerman was the editor-in-chief of Israel's Plus 972 magazine before the order, which is titled Operation Swords of Iron. Israeli chief censor directive to the media does not specify a date, but it was likely issued after Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7, as it makes reference to the name of Israel's current military operation in Gaza, Operation Swords of Iron. Israel Defense Forces Chief Canon Brig General Kobi Mandelblit has signed the order. When asked for comment on the memo, the Israeli military censor did not react. The Intercept obtained the document through a reliable source who had personally been provided with a copy by the Israeli military. You can find a copy of the same document on the website of the Israeli government. Given the present state of affairs and the extensive coverage in the media, we kindly request that you submit to the censorship, before they are broadcast, any materials pertaining to the operations of the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, and the Israeli Security Forces, states the order. The news desk and field reporters in particular need to be apprised of the contents of this letter, so please do so. According to the directive, the Israeli military censor must give advance consent before any news outlets may cover any of 8 specified subjects. Topics covered include the Israeli hostages in Gaza, a matter that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has taken a lot of heat for mishandling, as well as discussions of Security Cabinet meetings and possibly embarrassing revelations regarding Israeli or Hamas-seized weapons, reporting on specifics of Israeli intelligence, cyber attacks, rocket attacks on sensitive Israeli locations, and battlefield visits by senior military officials are all forbidden by the memorandum. There is real substantive reason to be concerned that the military censor may become politicized. According to reports, last month the Israeli censor said that he felt pressured by Netanyahu to censor specific media outlets without good cause. The accusation was denied by Netanyahu, secrecy, and self-censorship. Within the Israeli Defense Forces Military Intelligence Directorate sits the Israeli military censor. The head censor is a military officer designated by the Minister of Defense to head the unit, according to Guy Lurie, a research fellow at the Israel Democracy Institute in Jerusalem, who spoke with The Intercept. Over 6,500 new items have been censored in some way by the Israeli government since the war on Hamas began. Referring to a report in the Israeli outlet Shakuf that was based on Freedom of Information requests, Lurie provided some context by saying that it was approximately 4 times higher than before the war started. However, during this period of heightened conflict, the number of submissions to the censor is significantly higher. Thus, according to Lurie, news items are subject to a normal level of censorship relative to the total number of submissions. Still, it's impossible to put a number on how many fresh stories the censor hits. Israeli journalists have a system of close relationships and a sense of what's coming up next, which allows them to self-censor. The stories that people know won't be accepted are not even reported, because people self-censor, as Omerman put it. And that is really evident right now in the fact that the media is not covering the Palestinian situation in Gaza to the average Israeli. According to experts, the censor in Israel wields power due to this type of informal censorship. The military censor was singled out in a 2022 State Department report on human rights in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, which focused on 2 Arabic-language newspapers in occupied East Jerusalem. Editors and journalists from those publications, however, reported engaging in self-censorship due to fear of retribution by Israeli authorities, the State Department said, adding that the IDF censor did not review the papers. There was a time when the censor oversaw an editors committee that included a journalist, a military officer, and a publicly elected official who presided over the group. A comparable, though informal, group continues to have some influence even though the editors committee is no longer formally in existence, being politically independent and exercising restraint, particularly in comparison to other countries in the region, allows the censor to maintain its respectability in Israel, despite the law that mandates it having extensive powers. The censor's formal authorities are severely limited by the legislation that controls censorship, Lurie told The Intercept. This informal arrangement, though, helps to lessen the impact. Almost everything takes place behind closed doors. Most communications between the censor and media outlets, as well as committee discussions, are considered confidential. An anonymous Western journalist working in Israel and Palestine offered a direct explanation for the secrecy of the processes and the unwillingness of news organizations to speak out, because it's embarrassing. The censor and the foreign press. It appears that the current Israeli war on Gaza was intended for Western media, given that the directive memo was written in English. Anyone from outside Israel who wants to work as a journalist there needs to get the green light from the government and swear to uphold the censorship. According to Omerman, in order to get a visa as a journalist, you have to get approval from GPO, the government press office, which means that prospective journalists are required to sign a document stating their intention to comply with the censor. That probably violates the ethics guidelines at a number of papers on its own. But a lot of journalists do put their names on it. For example, when asked by The Intercept if it cooperates with the military censor, the Associated Press did not answer. However, the Newswire has covered the subject before, even admitting that it follows the order. The Associated Press stated in a 2006 story that they had agreed to follow the censor's rules, just like other organizations, in order to be allowed to operate as a media organization in Israel. Reporters are expected to refrain from reporting on any content that is prohibited. We aren't able to share insight, the Washington Post's communications director Azza Al-Fadl Miranda told The Intercept in an email when asked if the paper followed instructions from Israel's military censor and if that had changed since the war began. He added, "We don't publicly discuss our editorial decisions." Quoted as follows, The New York Times reports independently on the full spectrum of this complex conflict. Source, The Intercept, New York Times. The Israeli military censor is not a source for our coverage. The Intercept did not receive any responses from Reuters. Press from other countries that work with the censor follow the same rules. Some stories make it past the censor's screening process, while others don't. For reports they wish to publish on specific topics, they know that they need to pass on to the censor, Lurie explained. The media knows they need to get the censor's approval on certain subjects, but the order's obvious allusion to the Hamas war is one of the peculiarities of the written censorship order in English. It's never happened for a particular war, Lurie said. The secret nuclear weapons stockpile of Israel is one issue that is understood to be delicate in that nation. Simon Wilson of the BBC interviewed the recently released nuclear program whistleblower Mordechai Vanunu in 2004. Despite demands from Israeli censors, Wilson refused to provide copies of the interview. The Israeli government then demanded an apology and barred Wilson from returning to the country. The BBC was initially reluctant to provide one, but in the end, the global news giant folded. His account indicates that the censors contacted him following the Vanunu interview and requested the tapes. No, he didn't. The BBC said in its apology that he regretted the problems this had caused. He agrees to follow the rules going forward and is aware that his visa could be revoked for further infractions. Originally intended to be kept under wraps, the apology was leaked online by the BBC before it was swiftly removed, according to a 2005 Guardian article opens in a new tab.